Hospitals are chaotic, and hospital pharmacy is a big part of that. From product shortages to high labor costs to confusion about lookalike products, all under the crush of life and death situations, there's a lot to worry about. But where others saw only headaches, Genexis co-founders Kendall Foster and Seth Coombs saw opportunity. They've combined their expertise and mobilized investors and partners to develop a platform to reinvent how critical care medicines are manufactured and delivered. The first product is already on the market, and there's a rich pipeline in development. Hi, everyone. I'm David Williams, president of strategy consulting firm Health Business Group and host of the HealthBiz podcast, a weekly show where I interview top healthcare leaders about their lives and careers. Welcome, Kendall. Welcome, Seth.
Thanks for having us.
All right. I love the purple. You know, I used to have red hair, so if we had the purple shirt and the red hair, it would look like a gumball machine. But but we don't have that. So great. So let's talk a little bit about your background, your upbringing, and childhood influences. Maybe Seth, start with you. What was your childhood like, and anything from that sort of stuck with you into your career?
Yeah. So grew up in a medical household. My father actually is an anesthesiologist, so we spent a lot of time talking about differentials at the dinner table. And my sister followed him into the family business. She's an ER physician. I was going to try to follow him, but he said, "I'll try to do something different." But I didn't get too far away from it. But still, true passion for healthcare, and I've been in healthcare for a long time.
That is pretty close. We have that. The closest one I've ever had, though, is there's a guy named Michael Doctor. And it's sort of like, how'd you decide to become a doctor? And he's like, I don't know. My parents were doctors, and my name's Doctor. So.
Right. I'm just going with it, making it easy. Right.
And how about you, Kendall? Also from a family of anesthesiologists? And
No, we are not a medical family at all. We're actually all engineers. So I grew up with Legos and Lincoln Logs and taking things apart. I think I took my first PC apart when I was 4 or 5 and put it back together. I needed a boot drive. My dad still beats me up for that back in the day.
Nice.
So family of engineers, we've always kind of tinkered, played with stuff, built stuff. And then I met this guy, and a decade ago now. We actually met in the last pandemic.
Got it.
Working on influenza. And so I'm my engineering and his sales, and we make a pretty good team.
Sounds good. So Seth, in terms of earlier career, what did you do before Genexis?
Yeah. So like Kendall alluded to, both of us worked in vaccines. So earlier career spent some time, out of school, working in medical communications agency type of work before I jumped over to Novartis for about a 16-year stint. And during that time frame, Kendall and I met in the vaccine world, where both of us were working on influenza. I did some time with influenza and travel vaccines, but then also I moved over from there to generics. And so spent a lot of time working on hospital generics and seeing some of the challenges that exist for clinicians in that space. Of course, sitting around the dinner table when I was younger, I heard a lot of them too.
Yeah.
A little more recently.
What are some of the challenges if people are not so familiar with?
Well, you talked about some of the macro issues, right? Things like shortages and the chaotic nature. But one of the challenges, the time pressure. When you're really talking about performance pressure of that clinician in acute and critical situations, their considerations are, how can I ensure that what I'm giving is the appropriate dose, the appropriate drug? And ultimately, what they want to be able to do is just reach, grab, and be able to execute. What's amazing is that the majority of products within the market are not really in that ready to administer format. And we saw an opportunity to be able to address it.
I mean, when you look, you mentioned generics from what you were doing before in the hospital. There's a lot of things that at least to the patient, they sort of look all the same. But I guess to the pharmacist and the physician, they also look the same.
Yeah, there's a sizable amount of products that all have the same color tip caps, right? When clinicians are looking, we had one clinician who had mentioned to us that when he works in his tray, he's looking at 7 different products that all have the same color tip caps. And when you're talking about an acute situation where you have to make a quick decision, you'd love to be able to grab and read your vial and take your time, but you don't always have that time.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity to make it ready to administer, something that is a grab, identify quickly, and then turn and reduce the opportunity for errors. That's something that definitely the entire system is looking for.
Got it. And Kendall, what were you up to before Genexis?
So I was also at Novartis. I was on the drug development and manufacturing side of it. So Seth mentioned we were working on influenza. I was on the supply chain and distribution side of it. I did some work right previously on the development and actual licensure of the flu vaccine that we were launching in the U.S. And was with Novartis for until about the day they decided to sell it off. So I think that's when Seth went to GENIXUS and I went to Cambridge and got an MBA. And then a couple years after that, kind of sat back down and, from some personal events, decided that, the work that we did in vaccines also applies outside of the vaccine world. So Seth and I spent 4 years doing a conversion because flu vaccines always came in vials.
Yeah.
Right? So we did a conversion from vials to prefilled syringes. And that was the same time of a a transition on who is actually allowed to administer vaccines, right? If you think back 15 years ago, right, it was all GPs and pediatricians. Now that was part of that transition was getting to pharmacists. Pharmacists in a CVS or Walgreens are also highly under time pressure. And so that was the big push from vial to PFS then. And so we spent a lot of time in development making them. If we can make, 4 proteins plus an adjuvant, stable in a pre-filled syringe, ship it around the country. That was really the launch and the build of essentially the background of what eventually led to Genexis.
Got it. So, you were describing already, Seth, growing up, hearing some of the challenges, and obviously both of you, working at Novartis and seeing where some things were going. And so there's enough of a kind of like a general business case for Genexis. But Kendall, you alluded to some personal experiences as well. So what was the origin story? I mean, was there a specific thing that led to you saying, yeah, we got to do something here?
Yeah, so call it the spark or the event that kind of created the thought process was, so my second, so I have 2 little girls, and she's healthy and fine, and she's 3 going on 13 in all of her might now. But when she was 2 weeks old, she spiked a fever. And as a young parent, if you had a child that young of an age as an infant spiked a fever, you go into the hospital. If it gets over a certain threshold, and they initiate what they call the meningitis protocol, which starts with the spinal tap of an infant, which is one of the most helpless I've ever felt as a parent. So spinal tap happens. We go up into the ICU. They immediately start her on fluids, and it's a two different antibiotics IV through a syringe pump infusion. And the reason they do this before they have the results is that if you do have meningitis, you're typically not going to make it by the time you get the results. So I don't know, we were 18 hours, 24 hours in, something at this point in the hospital, in the stay. And me being an engineer, I get curious. I start kind of wandering around, opening stuff, things I probably shouldn't be doing. And the doctor will yell at me. But I opened up a syringe pump because after the medication is delivered, it goes off and it beeps, and it's actually quite annoying. And I noticed, because I just wanted to be curious, what's the drug? Who made it? Where's it coming from? And I found just a standard dosing syringe, a plastic polypropylene syringe that someone in the hospital had prepared. No drug name, right? There was a Sharpie written across of it. And I was like, that didn't come out of an FDA facility. Like, we made pre-filled syringes. We would throw away perfectly good product because the label was skewed, right? Much less we wrote on a Sharpie, right? So it was a real juxtaposition of what I thought medication delivery was in the U.S. and what it actually was, and really that gap of where pharma innovation tends to stop, where the generic industry kind of takes over, and what happens. And it wasn't the same follow through we saw in vaccines.
Yeah.
So, I called Seth up, and a number of other people was like, please explain to me this was just like a fluke or a loophole, right? If we did this in vaccines, obviously a simple small molecule, this could have been done 30 years ago. And it hasn't been done. But there's very little delivery innovation or delivery really life cycle management of these products that have been essentially codified by use in hospitals. And they are still stuck with whatever format it was put in 30, 40, 50 years ago. And so really that origin story was like, well, I mean, if we solve this with a glass syringe with proteins, shipped it across the country, shipped it across the world to numerous different countries, we can easily basically re-execute the same model we essentially did, obviously with some tweaks with generics versus vaccines, and redo the same development and provide the same benefit that we did 10 years ago.
Yeah. So why is it, like this? I mean, I get the sense that, there's all this work and control and stuff done at pharma companies, and, even in the sort of the supply chain up to delivery to the hospital. But then when it gets to the hospital, sort of it's almost like it's thrown over the wall, and then whatever happens inside the hospital is a much less controlled environment than everything that led up to it, just sort of in general. When you saw that plastic syringe with a Sharpie writing on it, I mean, is that typical, or was it just you were in a particularly bad spot?
Well, I mean, I think that hospitals are put in a tough spot to be able to address this. And when they're having to convert things either right on the floor or in the pharmacy, the technology that's available to them. I mean, if you think about the amount of work, and especially in the environment we're in now, right, with the amount of open positions and nursing shortages and clinician shortages and challenges they have in the hospital environment, sadly, it is relatively common, right, to have to do these conversions. And we just saw an opportunity to say, look, these people are doing enough. Why don't we try and drive some simplicity specifically for the clinician? Because anything we do that drives simplicity for them allows them to provide better patient care. And so that was really what spurred it, from what Kendall's experience was, and then mine on the company side. We had a sizable amount of products, right, where it was before, and we didn't have them in ready to administer formats, and so there were opportunities there to improve.
That sounds good. All right, so now you decided to have the company, started it up. GENIXUS, any particular meaning behind the name?
It was actually Genexis, GENEXUS,
Yeah.
and we missed the timeline for the trademark to Thermo Fisher by about 2 months.
Yeah.
So they filed a trademark for a gene sequencer, which just happens to also be used in life sciences, and so that was the end of it. But the core of the name. So we changed it to an I. It's actually very cute that it now spells genius.
Yeah.
But the core of the name is really, next generation generics was really what we were going for. It's generics for us, right? So when I take a step back, if we are successful in changing the number of drugs that we need to into pre-filled syringe, and thus adopting medical practice where hopefully all generics used in hospitals are ready to administer, there's no excess work needed to be done by healthcare administrators and nurses and doctors, right? It's the truly simplicity, right? The generic industry, let's say, has evolved this challenge. And hopefully when we're laying on the operating table as older individuals, right, that there's not a risk of a medical error or a mix-up or something that could have been avoided by technology that's been available, right? So trying to truthfully leave the world a little bit better place and help everybody be a little bit more efficient.
That sounds very worthy. So let's talk about what kind of progress you made to date. Obviously, you started the company, got the name on the second try, and what have you done in terms of building the team, developing products, raising funds? Like where are you along the cycle there?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, from a team perspective, obviously culture is paramount. We've come from large companies that worked very hard on building really dynamic cultures, and we saw a need really to establish that foundation. And so, we've been able to build the team. We're just short, I think, of around 40 folks now. We're actually down at our headquarters for a kickoff meeting for the year. And a really dynamic group of people across manufacturing, quality, commercial, to basically establish that foundation of growth for us for the future. From a fundraising standpoint, we had brought in early stages about $1 million for proof of concept and go-to-market kind of, let's say, structuring. And then we were able to secure a $20 million round with a major pharmaceutical company in January of last year. And in that time frame, then we were able to stand up our primary manufacturing facility and working on a second, and actually work through that entire year to actually produce our initial commercial material within December. So 11 months to first commercial material, which was a huge effort. So we're really excited about the ability to bring that first product to market and be able to start addressing these needs for simplicity within the hospitals.
No, it sounds good. Well, I'm one of your investors. I'm not the $20 million investor, but I'm somewhere in that first one. So keep working hard. You mentioned the concept of the pre-filled syringe. Now, on the one hand, that's just kind of a concept, but what makes it something that you can do and others can't just copy?
So, really good question. The core technology of pre-filled syringes with pharmaceuticals have been around 30, 40 years now at this point. A lot has evolved. The vaccine industry, what we came out of, really drove the mass manufacturing, the scale, the operation of that, and just from the breadth of what they cover and the price sensitivity of vaccines, specifically in Europe and rest of the world countries. So the technology's really been vetted and invested in heavily by both pharma companies and equipment manufacturers. Now that whole format and function from a design standpoint is really built around a glass syringe, a 1 ml or a 2 ml glass syringe. And so since that time, technology has changed. There's been a bunch of innovative plastic and polymers that have come out. There's a number of drugs already licensed in these type of primary containers. And so really, when we look at the generic industry, we're not talking about a 1 ml injection. We're talking about 10 mils, 20 mils, 50 mils, things that are in syringe pumps. And so the way that we looked at this is like, how do I take the existing technology infrastructure that was basically been developed and vetted and works, and use that to fill a container that is going to be 10, 20, and 50 mLs in size. And no doctor wants a 50 ml glass syringe, right? That's just a no-go in an operating room. So we integrate the polymer, we put it in the same technology and footprint, and now we have the ability to make essentially a 20 ml pre-filled syringe in a polymer. We can manufacture to the same rigors that we would do a biologics, like we do in vaccines. And then thus with that, the other attributes kind of come with it because you integrated that kind of technology and quality focus into the design. And so can someone reverse engineer it? Yes, right? Like just like every generic, there'll be more and more competitors on the market that kind of follow suit. But really that's kind of just proof that the market is adopting and we're just kind of on the front edge of that adoption.
So how do you think about, obviously it's like it's a delivery technology and it could be used presumably for a lot of the different generic drugs that are in hospitals. How do you think about what product or what products to go with first? Like what makes a good candidate? How do you decide, on your first product?
So the first product was an interesting conversation because we've in the beginning stages of the company, before we raised the 20 million, we had circled this a lot. From my personal situation, I want to start with antibiotics. And there have been a number of other kind of shots on goal or design attempts around this. But really when we talked to clinicians and we talked to providers, there was a willingness to pay for prefilled syringes in certain parts of the hospital. And so we kind of landed with the anesthesia focus because there was a stronger willingness to pay for prefills at that point in time. But there were a number of drugs that could not be put into prefilled syringes due to stability concerns, due to infection concerns, oxygen-sensitive drugs. And so we essentially went after the drugs that could not be put into syringes. So if we're going to develop a platform, we're going to show this is going to be robust and work. Let's pick the drugs that can't be done. And so that's what we did. And we picked the first drug that we launched is a drug called propofol. It is an oil and water emulsion. It is sensitive to oxygen. It has a challenge with growing bacteria in it from just a manipulation standpoint. So it's a highly complex drug. And so we basically kind of said, this is a drug that people want to buy. Let's spend the effort now to do the R&D, because if we solve the propofol problem, we can solve the rest of the ones that are used in the same tray and give the same benefit. So really it was customer driven first. Because again, when you take a step back, we're looking at it as a platform and as a concept, right? How do I make everything that the doctor or the CRNA or when the OR, when you walk into the OR, how do I make it so that you open up a tray and every drug you need to deliver is ready to administer? You don't have to manipulate it. The pharmacy didn't manipulate it. The nurse didn't manipulate it. It's ready to go, right? We've gotten to from a society, we're very used to things kind of, instantly on, ready to go. And so there's no reason your drug can't be the same way. So take it as the macro picture. The platform is intended to work for all of them. And we're just going to start off with the ones that no one else can provide.
When you talk about willingness to pay, I'm thinking about hospital finances, which are in tough shape at the moment, and they have staffing challenges, reimbursement issues, and so on. How does what you're doing come into the economics? Is it just sort of you talk about willingness to pay? Is it just, hey, they've got the luxury of doing it, they'll pay for it here, or is there like a hard dollar and cents potential return on investment as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in the discussions that we've had with the buyers at hospitals. Obviously, to your point, the current macro environment is making it tough in the hospital systems across the country. And we didn't have an intention of designing a product that's phenomenal, that could work well for them, but also delivering it at an unattainable structure, because we recognize, where these positions are and where the prices are being paid in the market. When the hospitals look at these, what they've already established is that within the market, that conversion is worth something to them, right? And then the question just becomes what incremental value can be driven around the attributes of the product. So what we looked at it was, on a product like propofol, let's deliver long-term shelf stability of the product, right? Because propofol, when it's removed from a vial, is only good per the label for 12 hours. And many hospitals actually restrict that amount of hours to much less than that, simply because they don't want a product that's out of spec, right? When it's being converted at the bedside. Ultimately, too, we incorporated the latest, an intuitive label, latest serialization techniques. We incorporated RFID within the label to help track and trace. We also color-coded the plunger rod to help with rapid identification. So we're looking at all these different factors to try and support both the supply chain in the hospital, but also actually use at the bedside. And in discussions that we've had with the market, they look at it very favorably, because that conversion of what's already happening within other parts of the market to syringes of some of these products, we're basically coming at a very similar price point.
Now, you mentioned RFID and the tracking traceability. I saw you have a partnership with KitCheck. Can you explain what that's about?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the RFID that we have embedded in our label that works within the KitCheck system. So hospitals that are already on KitCheck, right, use the KitCheck system, and Blue Site, I believe it's called now. They just changed their name. But the Blue Site group, ultimately, the hospital has some equipment within their pharmacy, where when they're stocking trays, they can then scan to identify what's in the tray, all the different relevant data related to products that have that tag on it, the RFID tag. So then when it goes up in the order and comes back, they can identify what's been used. They can identify if anything's gone out of expiry. So it can support billing, but what it really also supports is a lot of efficiency and turnover of those materials. So incorporating that we saw is very important, because we looked at it and said, how much can we make this product smart? KitCheck's the market leader right now in the RFID space. If we can make that product smart, we will. So that just became table stakes for us to incorporate it.
I mentioned up front this issue about product shortages. You sometimes hear about hospitals, having a shortage of drugs. Things are not available for whatever reason. Sometimes it has to do with a manufacturing problem, distribution. It's a little unclear. I think it's unclear to me. I think it's unclear sometimes to others. What's the root cause of that? Is there anything that you're doing that has an impact on maybe ameliorating those shortages or preventing them from happening, or no connection there?
Well, I think that, so the way I look at it is, hospitals, what they're trying to do is set up relationships with suppliers that ultimately can ensure that they're getting the product in. There are a lot of effects, and we won't get into a debate about what causes or doesn't cause the shortages, but what we're trying to do is set up relationships with institutions and commit for delivery. So ultimately what that means to us is manufacturing it locally here in the United States, sourcing from the groups that we had long relationships with during our timeframes in our previous roles. So top quality suppliers, and also from markets that haven't got embroiled in some of these geopolitical challenges. So ensuring that we can get the materials that we need, hold amounts of stock related to raw materials and finished goods that can support those hospitals, but also committing to them in the sense that if we have an amount of capacity that we're going to be able to deliver, that when the hospital signs up for that amount of units, that's the amount they have on the line. And a lot of what it goes into for us is ensuring that, the promises that are made, we're consistently under-promising and over-delivering, right? In the sense of, when you sign up with us, we're basically committing that volume and our ability to be able to provide it.
So I think it's very exciting, obviously, to get the company up and running, ship the first product out. You've got some that are coming behind it. If I take a look at kind of just all of what's happening in the healthcare system, and maybe just focus it on hospital and the critical care side of it, how big of an impact do you think what Genexis is doing can have, in hospitals? Is this just sort of like a blip, a chance to, make a few dollars for somebody, or does it have, how fundamental is the opportunity of what you're doing? Are you actually changing critical care?
I think when we take a step back, what we're really, again, going back, our goal is to simplify medicine for critical care, right? I mean, our focus is the healthcare provider, right? It's not to the patient. It's the same drug. It's the same application they're going to get. Our goal is truly to make the nurses and the doctors' lives easier, right? And so, at the end of the day, are we going to become the next massive injectable player? No, right? But what our objective is to create enough traction that the others in the industry and the generic industry follow us, and they start to say, all right, if we want to stay relevant in this game, we need to make everything else ready to admit. I mean, the technology's there across the board, right? And so, really, if we make nurses' lives easier, doctors' lives easier, right, they'll become either more efficient with the number of patients they process, or they'll have greater job satisfaction, or there'll be less repetitive hand injuries. There's a whole host of things to do that this real kind of focus, this consumer focus on the healthcare provider can deliver at the end of the day, right? Us and our first product and our kind of subsequent products that will follow suit, will we have an impact? We absolutely hope so, and we hope it's meaningful and lasting. But really, when we kind of take a step back, if we become the rabbit that the rest of the generic industry follows, then kudos to the nurses and the doctors, because hopefully their lives are a lot easier down the road.
So last question, unrelated to the rest of the conversation, unless you want to relate it, is whether you've been reading any good books lately, anything that you would recommend to listeners and viewers.
What I would say is we're reading a lot of material right now that's coming to us through a fire hose related to ensuring that we're dotting all the I's and crossing the T's related to contracts and different pieces as we scale this business. I would say the book I'm kind of stuck in the middle of is the latest. I believe it's Isaacson wrote it with Jennifer Doudna about CRISPR technology and the founding of that, which is a fascinating read. But I think it's interesting when we talk about being the next massive generic company. We talk about any way we cut the data, we look at billions of units of this stuff every year, right? Being consumed by U.S. hospitals, and thousands of SKUs they're having to deal with, and the majority of them not being ready to administer. So there's a huge opportunity there, right? And I think that, it's funny when I look at some of the things they do. I can't compare the science, but I would say, it's fun to look at some people in this kind of entrepreneurial journey, because I'd been in larger companies before. It's exciting to be able to build something, establish a foundation of a great culture with phenomenal people to tackle a problem that needs to be addressed. And it's a worthy one to try and take on the challenge.
That's good. Kendall, how about any reading on your side?
So the last book I read it's a children's book. It's called I Am Fine. It's written by a child psychologist. It is basically to explain anxiety to a 3-year-old or a 5-year-old. So kind of working through that explanation. I'm a great engineer. I am not a psychologist. So I get all the help I can working with my 2 little girls. So I've been reading that one most nights right now.
No, that sounds very good. Well, I ask all the guests, what they've been reading, and I have to say, a lot of them cite some of the same books. But Seth, I've never heard an answer as good as yours, which is, here's the book I'm reading, but let me get back to tell you about why this company is so important, what I'm doing. So
let me switch the question into something else.
I love that. You could
very political. You
could become a governor or senator if once you do this. Well, anyway, Kendall Foster, Seth Coombs from Genexis, thank you so much for joining me today on the HealthBiz podcast.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been listening to the HealthBiz podcast with me, David Williams, president of Health Business Group. I conduct in-depth interviews with leaders in healthcare business and policy. If you like what you hear, go ahead and subscribe on your favorite service. While you're at it, go ahead and subscribe on your second and third favorite services as well. There's more good stuff to come, and you won't want to miss an episode. If your organization is seeking strategy consulting services in healthcare, check out our website, healthbusinessgroup.com.